Friends, recently I watched a Japanese horror anime called Muryu no Hako, which translates to Box of Goblins in English. This anime is based on a novel of the same name, written by Natsuhiko Kayagaku and published in 1995. The series consists of a total of 13 episodes, and the storyline follows a non-linear timeline. That's why, during the explanation, I will narrate the story in a linear way to make it easier to follow. We will cover all 13 episodes in 2 videos. In today's video, we will go through the story of the first 5 episodes, and the next video will be released just a day later, where we will discuss the remaining 8 episodes. So, at the beginning of the story, we meet a boy named Sekiguchi, who is traveling by train to his grandmother's house because she had passed away that day. On the train, he notices a man in a black suit sitting across from him, holding a box in his hands. Sekiguchi hears a faint sound coming from the box, and when the suited man opens it, we see the severed head of a girl inside the box, who is somehow still able to speak. The scene cuts off here. Now, the story shifts to the perspective of a girl named Yuriko, who has feelings for her classmate Kanako. Kanako is a quiet and intelligent girl. One day after class, Kanako invites Yuriko to come to her house, which makes Yuriko extremely happy. From that day on, the two girls start spending a lot of time together and often visit a cafe. Kanako tells Yuriko about Teningasu, which means 5 death omens of an angel. It signifies that when angels are about to perish, their bodies go through 5 changes. First, the flowers from the crown on their heads start falling off. Then, they begin sweating under their armpits. After that, they start feeling dizzy. Finally, all the happiness in their heart fades away. Once these 5 transformations are complete, the angel ceases to exist. This deeply affects Yuriko, and she begins to imagine. Yuriko starts wondering, if even goddesses and angels can perish, then what will happen to her mother? After this, we get a glimpse into Yuriko's home life. Her father was not present, and her mother used to craft the heads of Japanese dolls known as kokeshi. The relationship between Yuriko and her mother was quite strained, and Yuriko barely spoke to her properly. We also learn the reason behind this. Yuriko's mother had feelings for a man named Mr. Sasaka, whom Yuriko absolutely despised. Sasaka was basically the one who commissioned Yuriko's mother to craft the heads of the dolls. Whenever Sasaka visited their house, Yuriko barely spoke to him. One day, Sasaka gifts Yuriko a kokeshi doll. As soon as she holds it, the doll's lips start moving in a strange way. Frightened, Yuriko drops the doll and rushes out of the house. That night, while running, Yuriko sees Kanako, who appears almost like an angel under the moonlight. Kanako then says something strange to Yuriko, as if she had predicted everything correctly. Yuriko is Kanako. Now, I know this might sound confusing, but we get a proper explanation for this in the later episodes. Anyway, that night the two spend time dancing and having deep conversations. Kanako, in particular, speaks like a philosopher, while Yuriko listens intently. We come to understand that an unbreakable, never-ending bond has formed between Kanako and Yuriko. In the end, a boy calls Kanako home, and she leaves with him. Yuriko wonders who Kanako stays with, and the scene cuts off there. The next day, Yuriko and Kanako go back to the cafe. Yuriko asks Kanako, "Why do you spend so much time with me?" Kanako smiles and replies, "Because you and I are the same person. That's why I enjoy spending time with you." She then explains that she is Yuriko's reincarnation. When she ceases to exist, she will become Yuriko, or if Yuriko disappears, she will turn into Kanako. This cycle will continue endlessly. Yuriko questions her, "How can you be my reincarnation when I am still alive?" Here we understand that Yuriko admires Kanako deeply. As a sign of their eternal connection, she ties a white thread around Kanako's wrist, symbolizing that they will remain bound together forever. When Yuriko returns home, her mother confronts her, accusing her of staying out all night with that girl. This leads to an argument between them, and in anger, Yuriko declares, "Kanako is not just my friend. She is my past life." Of course, Yuriko's mother finds this absurd and refuses to believe her. In fact, Yuriko's mother even says that Kanako will turn her into a demon or an evil spirit. Yuriko doesn't like hearing these things and, feeling upset, retreats to her room. After this incident, the distance between Yuriko and her mother grows even more. Every Friday, when Yuriko's mother would go out with Sasaka, Yuriko takes the opportunity to spend time with Kanako. One day, Kanako opens up about her own mother, explaining how her relationship with her mother was also not good. In fact, her mother was very ill. Kanako also shares that her mother is no longer in this world. Whenever Kanako tried to get close to her mother would grab her by the throat and tell her to end it all. This deeply hurt Kanako, but now she's happy because she lives with her older sister, who loves her very much. During this conversation, Kanako grabs Yuriko by the throat, demonstrating the incident with her mother. In response, Yuriko says, "Even if you end me, I will be happy because my end will be at your hands." Kanako then releases her grip, and they continue to stay together. Kanako invites Yuriko to spend the summer break with her at a lake for some sightseeing. Yuriko imagines having a great time there. Scene shifts to the night when they are supposed to go for the lake viewing. Yuriko arrives at the station, where Kanako is waiting for her, tears in her eyes. Yuriko asks her why she is crying, but Kanako mostly stays silent. Yuriko notices a small, pimple-like bump on Kanako's neck. Anyway, in the same train we see Detective Kiba sitting, and something strange happens to him. He notices some unusual handprints inside the cabin. It seemed as though it was some kind of flashback from a war, possibly because Kiba had formerly served in the army. At this moment, he also experiences a flashback of his friend, Sekiguchi, the same boy from the first scene. Yes, Detective Kiba and Sekiguchi knew each other. Anyway, the situation returns to normal, and just then the train comes to a halt. Kiba gets off and sees that a girl has appeared in front of the train, and that girl is none other than Kanako. Yes, friends, that night Kanako has an accident with a train. She survives, but she is severely injured. Yuriko was nearby, crying, and was so traumatized by the incident that she couldn't say anything to Kiba. In the next scene, we see Sekiguchi talking about his grandmother's coffin, mentioning how she was buried in a round coffin. Nearby, there was also a raven bird, which symbolized bad omen. We also learn that Sekiguchi has a deep aversion to prostitutes, and that he was still thinking about the girl in the box from the train incident, whom he had become somewhat obsessed with. In the next scene, we see Kiba talking to Yuriko, who had only shared that Kanako was 14 years old and had a pimple on her neck. Kiba was also troubled by this, but Yuriko's constant crying wasn't stopping. The officer handling the case, Fuko Mato, was still a rookie and was following Kiba's orders since he didn't know much about train accidents. Yuriko tells Kiba that since it's Friday, her mother won't come to pick her up because she wasn't home. Yuriko lives with Kiba now, and she requests to meet Kanako. Kiba arrives at the accident site and feels like Kanako's face seems familiar, but he can't recall where he's seen it before. Fuko Mato, on the other hand, had no idea if this was an accident or something else. At this point, Kiba decides to take Yuriko to the hospital to meet Kanako, as Yuriko wants to see her friend. After this, police officer Fuko Mato takes Kiba and Yuriko to the hospital. Upon reaching the hospital, Kiba learns that Kanako is feeling a bit better. He also meets a strange, rude man who asks Kiba if he's sure that this is the real Kanako. Kiba, a little shaken, replies that he isn't obliged to explain this to him. The man gets more impolite, which angers Kiba, but he manages to control himself. At that moment, Mia arrives, claiming to be Kanako's guardian. This is the same man who had come to invite Kanako to his home one night. Mia feels guilty because taking care of Kanako was his responsibility. When Kiba asks how he became her guardian, Mia explains that their family arrangement is a little different. Then a woman enters, who turns out to be Kanako's older sister. Everyone is shocked to see her because Kanako's sister is a famous actress, named Minami Kinoko, and her real name is Yoko. By the way, in the series, we will refer to her as Yoko. After all this happens, we find out that Detective Kiba was a huge fan of Yoko, and he even had a picture of her in his diary. That's why Kanako's face seemed so familiar to him. Fukumoto tells Kiba about Yoko's history, explaining that Yoko was once a very famous actress, but suddenly rumors started spreading that she had dropped her acting career and run away with a man who was her lover. Meanwhile, Kanako's family asks Kiba about everything, but Kiba says that he doesn't know much and hadn't told Yuriko anything specific. Just then, Yuriko's mother arrives, scolding her for staying out all night. She even tries to slap Yuriko, but Kiba stops her by grabbing her hand and says, "It took you this long to find out that your daughter is here? That means you're not taking proper care of your daughter either." Now, the strange thing here was that Kanako's family member, the rude person, her mother's husband, suspected that this might be a well-thought-out conspiracy, and someone had deliberately pushed Kanako into the tracks. Yoko was about to say something about this, but suddenly, she falls silent. Then, everyone starts interpreting whether it was really an accident. Finally, they all decide to take Kanako to a good hospital where Yoko's surgeon friend can treat her properly. Here, a disagreement arises between Yoko and Masako, but they don't reveal anything in front of Kiba. From these scenes, we understand that this family has a secret, which might be connected to Kanako's accident. Anyway, in the next scene, Sekiguchi talks about a case where a man was killing young girls and disposing of their body parts in different places. This had been happening for a long time. Sekiguchi was accompanied by his friend Toriguchi and a girl named Chuji. During the investigation, they discuss Ubum-sama, which was an exorcism of evil spirits. Through this process, evil spirits was sealed inside a box. They also look into recent incidents where the victims' body parts were found inside a box. Sekiguchi believes that such crimes were committed because the perpetrators were probably not mentally stable. However, Chuji shares that her brother Kagaka had a different view. He believed that criminals were possessed by Toraimono, which was a Japanese monster. This monster would take complete control of the person's mind and force them to commit heinous acts, such as killing victims. Chuji then asks Toriguchi how he knew that the victims' legs were found near Saga Lakes today. Because this information had not even been published in the newspapers yet. To this, Toriguchi replies that he had a contact in the police department who told him everything. Sekiguchi was also involved in investigations, so he was called in to help with this case. These people also knew Kiba and were talking about him. By the time they leave town, evening has already fallen, and they feel like they have taken the wrong route. So, they take a U-turn at the next available turn. To their surprise, they find themselves standing in front of a strange black cubicle building, where they are surrounded by the police. It turns out that this is the same place where Kanako was brought. Inside, the surgeons were treating Kanako. Detective Kiba and Sekiguchi were observing the identification building, and Kiba was feeling suspicious. She assumed that demons were operating on Kanako's body, even though it was just a team of doctors. In a flashback, she imagines a demon pushing her onto the tracks, telling her to end herself. Kanako feels like she is being punished. She remembers Yuriko and thinks, "I need to meet Yuriko as soon as possible to talk about the next life." Thinking this, she falls unconscious again. At this point, the story shifts to Kiba's dream, where he is reflecting on the events of the night. We see that, at night, Kiba, Yoko, and Fukumoto were driving a police van towards the black box facility, barely avoiding an accident. Kiba also thinks about Kanako's family dynamics, but he fails to figure out anything significant. In the dream, a man warns Kiba to stay away from the black box facility because he has heard that whoever enters it never returns alive, just like Kubabara. Anyway, Detective Kiba arrives at the facility to meet Kanako. The story then shifts to a flashback, where one day, Yoko receives a letter saying that Kanako is seriously ill and may not survive. The letter also demands that Yoko prepare 10 million yen, with further details to be revealed in September. Frightened by this letter, the police increased security around the black box facility, and Kiba became involved in the case. He began investigating this mysterious letter and Kanako's accident. In the present, Kiba frequently visits the facility, which annoys the commissioner. The commissioner taunts him, asking, Don't you have anything better to do than interfere in our case? Kiba fires back, saying, have you police officers solved the mystery behind the missing schoolgirls and their murders that keep happening in the surrounding areas? This leads to an argument between them, but eventually, Kiba refocuses on his case. Meanwhile, Yuriko remembers Kanako, and the scene shifts to the day of the accident. That day, Yuriko's mother came to the hospital to take her home. On their way back, Yuriko's mother gets furious at her, saying, you have embarrassed me so much. And that girl who had the accident wasn't even mentally stable. Yuriko remains silent and simply responds, Mom, why don't you just disappear? Hearing this, Yuriko's mother is shocked. After that night, Yuriko's mother completely changed. She started believing that an evil entity had taken over Yuriko's consciousness. Not only that, but she also started violently attacking Yuriko, trying to expel the evil spirit from her. To get rid of this supposed entity, Yuriko's mother and Sasaka invite a shaman to their house. The shaman's terrifying words frighten Yuriko's mother even more. Terrified, Yuriko runs away from home. But on the way, she encounters the same man in a black suit who pushes her aside and walks ahead. The same man we saw in the train at the beginning of the story. Yuriko notices that the man was wearing gloves. Remember, all of this is from the past, which Yuriko is recalling. In the present, Yuriko is sitting in a cafe, reading the same magazine that Kanako used to read. Yuriko sees Kanako as an angel, and at that moment, she remembers something. On Friday, the day of the accident, a man wearing white gloves had pushed Kanako onto the tracks. She immediately informs Detective Kiba and the police officer about this. In fact, Yuriko now wants to meet Kanako. Meanwhile, at the facility, Detective Kiba notices that Amamiya wants to say something but is unable to. At the same time, Yoko asks Yuriko if it's true that Kanako was pushed onto the tracks. Yuriko then describes the entire station incident. She was standing diagonally from Kanako at the station when, suddenly, a man wearing a black suit and white gloves came from behind and pushed Kanako onto the tracks. After this, Yuriko goes to meet Kanako. She enters a room and sees Kanako behind the curtains. Kanako smiles upon seeing Yuriko, and Yuriko starts crying. Everyone tries to calm her down. Meanwhile, the commissioner notices that Kanako's lips are moving, as if she is saying something. The very next moment, when the doctor's assistant goes behind the curtain, they look around and realize that Kanako is not there. Everyone is shocked and rushes inside, only to see that Kanako is missing from the bed. Yuriko, in her mind, thinks that Kanako has become an angel and flown into the sky. In the next scene, we see Sekiguchi holding a knife, standing in front of scattered body parts. At first glance, it looks like Sekiguchi is the criminal responsible for the murders of young girls. However, he says that he needs to visit a doctor who can make a clean cut on body parts so that he can identify the girl with the severed head, the same girl he saw on the train. Anyway, back at the black box facility, the commissioner is speechless because he cannot understand how Kanako disappeared from her room despite heavy security. Everyone starts searching for Kanako, and even the commissioner turns to Detective Kiba for help. Kiba starts wondering, was Kanako ever really there? Could it be that the girl who had the accident was just an illusion of Kanako? Fukumoto then says, only a physically healthy person can be kidnapped. Why would anyone kidnap a sick girl like Kanako? And just like that, he speaks insensitively, which frustrates Kiba to the point that he punches him. Yuriko insists that Kanako cannot die. She has become an angel. Kiba listens as Yuriko talks about reincarnation and past lives, but he considers it all nonsense. Here, Kiba asks Yoko for more details about Kanako. However, Yoko tells him, you can't handle everything alone. It's better if you don't get involved in this. But it was too late. Kiba had already taken this case personally. So, Kiba begins his investigation. He asks Yoko, does your family have any enemies? To this, Yoko replies, our family's greatest enemy is you, Kiba. Hearing this, Kiba is stunned and unable to respond. Meanwhile, a nurse who was part of Kanako's treatment was also found dead. Then we catch a glimpse of Kanako, who wonders, am I dead? In her imagination, she sees Yuriko, Yoko, and the doctor. She also sees her severed limbs, her hands and legs, moving. Seeing this, she thinks she must be dreaming. Kanako feels relieved that her limbs are intact. But to her shock, her hands and legs had been replaced with machinery. Only her torso remained. The scene then cuts to a dark room, where Kanako hears Amamiya's voice. "Don't worry, we will always be together," he says. Just then, someone opens the door to the dark room, looks at Kanako and says, "She is a work of art." This meant that Kanako was likely not dead. Someone was keeping her alive. Now, in the next scene, we see a severed leg embedded in a stone wall. It was placed inside a cask, and in a small shrine, a severed hand was also kept. Then on the next day, September 10th, Sekiguchi submits his novels to a publishing house. The publishers want to print them. Sekiguchi was an excellent writer, but he never valued his own art. Writing was too personal for him. Here, the publisher gives him 10 days to decide whether he wants to publish his novels or not. Just then, Chuzuki arrives and announces that more body parts have been discovered in the town. "This is the third victim," she says. There is also a rumor that a demon is responsible for doing this to young women. Chuzuki refers to it as kasha, a term that means, a person who committed sins in their life will have their body parts torn apart by a demon as a form of punishment after death. Now, in the next scene we see a woman, a prostitute, who is working in her usual area, looking for customers. That night, the police raid the area. She tries to hide, but the man in the black suit grabs her from behind. In the next scene, we see this man placing her severed head in a box. Her hands and legs were also cut off and placed in the same box. By the way, this incident took place on September 16th. Moving forward, we see Detective Kiba. He had dropped the Kanako case. Of course, Yoko's harsh words had hurt him, and even Amamiya had left everyone. Lost in thought, Kiba sits in his dorm when his partner, Bojo, arrives. Bojo tells him, "The severed limbs of the girls and Kanako's case. They're connected. Because if you think about it, as soon as Kanako disappeared, arms and legs started appearing." Hearing this, Detective Kiba, filled with fear, asks, "Are those body parts Kanako's?" Bojo replies, "No, because the blood type of the body was different." He also informs Kiba that the women from the red light district are helping the police find the culprits. Bojo shares all this information because he needs Kiba's help in finding the person behind these crimes. The fourth victim was the same prostitute we had already seen earlier. Bojo also reveals that all the victims' body parts were found inside boxes, except for the first arm that was discovered. In fact, earlier the boxes were made of steel, but now they are wooden, made from paulownia wood. Bojo further discloses that the public is largely unaware of this case. Only Sekiguchi knows about it because he was a close ally of an officer. Hearing this, Kiba is shocked. How is Sekiguchi involved in all this? Bojo then mentions a rumor about the demon Kasha, which has led people to believe there is a supernatural angle to this case. Now, there is one more connection that links the case of the missing girls to Kanako's case, and that is the man with the gloves. On the day Kanako was kidnapped, Yoko saw a man wearing white gloves inside the black box facility. In fact, Yuriko also mentioned a man wearing gloves who had pushed Kanako onto the tracks. Even in the red light district, a girl who was running away claimed to have seen a man wearing gloves in their alley. So yes, this man with gloves seems to be a common link in all these cases. Anyway, in the next scene, Detective Kiba speaks with director Kawashan. The director explains that, in his opinion, Yoko quit acting because someone was externally forcing her to do so. He believes that someone was constantly following Yoko, which is why she left acting. This means the rumor about Yoko running away with her lover is complete nonsense. Kiba assumes that the man following Yoko was probably Amamiya. The black box hospital Kiba is talking about is actually Mimasaka Medical Clinic, founded by Dr. Mimasaka. The director then tells Kiba that Mimisaka is a scientist that Frankenstein-like monster Mimisaka was trying to create. Mimisaka was attempting to make artificial soldiers, funded by the army chief, and was conducting bizarre experiments. These soldiers were supposed to be immortal. The director calls Mimisaka a mad scientist. Hearing all this, Kiba returns home and once again, he experiences war flashbacks where many of his comrades were lost. This terrifies Kiba as he remembers a war machine that tore soldiers' limbs apart. A machine that he himself named the Kasha Demon. Now, the scene shifts to September 13th, where we see Masuka talking to a white-haired man. In case you forgot, Masuka is that rude man from Kanako's family. What exactly these two were discussing will be revealed later. In the next scene, we see Sekiguchi thinking about that same girl. Sekiguchi imagines himself walking toward a door, where the girl is standing. He is about to reach out his hand to her when suddenly, another girl appears from behind. Blood is dripping from her thighs. Then a gust of wind rushes toward Sekiguchi, and a female voice whispers, "The day this door opens, this story will come to an end." Sekiguchi replies, "I have always feared the day when someone would come and put an end to this story." These were lines from Sekiguchi's story, The Vertigo. Now, the story shifts to Tokyo in the year 1913, where a group of professors is seated with a lady, with a box placed in front of them. This was a clairvoyance experiment, meaning that some people in the world have the ability to see distant events. They can perceive things from the future, as if they are happening in the present. Such individuals are called clairvoyants, and this lady was one of them. The professors were conducting an experiment to test her ability. Previously, this lady had faced humiliation when her powers failed to manifest, because someone had switched the box. A long time had passed since that incident, and now the professors wanted to meet her again to verify the lady's ability. A renowned professor had been invited. The lady's name was Nagao Ikoku, and she was ready to undergo the experiment once more. A box was placed before her. She focused on it and said, "This box does not contain a dry plate." Everyone opened the box and saw that there was indeed no plate inside. The professor apologized to the lady, saying, "Perhaps there was some mistake on our end." But Lady Nagao replied, "There is no need to apologize, because I can sense that something is definitely wrong here." Due to this unknown issue, the experiment had to be stopped. Then 5 days later, when another experiment was scheduled, this time using camera films, it too had to be cancelled, because the film itself was stolen. Inside the film roll, a note was found saying, "I know all your tricks." As the clairvoyance experiments continued to fail, a public notice was issued stating that clairvoyance does not exist. The great scholar Fuji wrote in a paper that clairvoyance is nothing more than a mind trick. As soon as these statements were published, Nagao took her own life, because her entire existence had been dedicated to this art. Then Professor Fukura, who had been leading these experiments, took it upon himself too. He was ignored, and debates about clairvoyance began. Now the story shifts back to the present, focusing on the white-haired man, who claimed to be a clairvoyant. His name was Ino Kajuna, and he ran a detective agency called Red Cross Detective Agency. We learn that Masuko, who was the attorney for Kanako's family, had come to meet him. Detective Inokizu was a fan of Yoko, Kanako's sister, and he immediately recognized the family. Masuko handed him a picture of Kanako and asked him to find her. He also explained Kanako's complicated family background. Kanako was an illicit child, whom her father never wanted to keep, but her mother was adamant, and despite being offered money, she refused to abort Kanako. In return, Kanako's father agreed to cover her education and medical expenses. Masuko, as the family and business solicitor, helped maintain this arrangement. Suddenly, Kanako's father decided to transfer all his wealth to her name, which the rest of the family strongly opposed. Thus, in his will, he added a final line declaring Kanako as his one and only daughter. This meant that all his property would go to her. Now the crucial thing was, if Kanako died before her father, the entire family would inherit the wealth. But if her father died first, the will would take full effect, and Kanako would become the sole heir to Mr. Yoko's great empire. Now the shocking part, just yesterday morning, Mr. Yoko passed away. That's why it was urgent to find Kanako, the only heir. Hearing all this, Detective Inokaju asked, "What about the box? And where is Detective Kiba?" This was shocking to us, because Inokaju had been sitting in his room, yet was still able to provide such detailed information, proving that he might actually be a real clairvoyant. Anyway, the story now moves to September 29th, where Seiki Guji was working on his novel. He had also mentioned Torimono in his story. Seiki Guji wondered, "If I meet Torimono, will I also become a murderer?" That morning, Seiki Guji had fallen asleep in his room. He was awakened by a knocking sound. It was Tori Guji, who had come to see him. Tori Guji asked him about his wife, to which he replied his wife had gone to watch a film. Tori Guji then tells him about the black box facility, which is a laboratory. The two of them chat casually, and then visit a bookstore run by Kyogoku-do. His wife greets them both. In the study room, we see Kyogoku-do sitting among a lot of books, who welcomes both of them. Whenever Seiki Guji faced difficulties in writing books, he would go to Kyogoku-do for help, as he was a very intelligent man. We also learn that Kyogoku-do was a clairvoyant, someone who could sense things from the past. At this point, the 5th episode ends. So, friends, this was the explanation of the first 5 episodes of Modio no Hako. Now, there are 8 more episodes left in the series, and I'll bring you the video explaining them within a day. Trust me, by the time we reach the 13th episode, all the mysteries will be revealed, which is going to be amazing. In fact, the real story begins from the 6th episode, where many things unfold. That's why I purposely explained only the first 5 episodes in the first video. Pique your interest. The biggest mystery is, who kidnapped Kanako? And who is killing the schoolgirls? Is there a supernatural angle? Or is it all the work of a single person? So yes, if you want to see these secrets unravel, please like and share this video. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the next video will be out in a day. And to avoid missing it, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, peace. Friends, in our previous video we covered the story of Muryu no Hako, or Box of Goblins, up to the first 5 episodes. Today we will continue that story and go through the remaining 8 episodes. If you haven't watched part 1, I highly recommend watching it first. Otherwise, this video might not make sense to you. I have provided the link to part 1 in both the description and the comment section. Anyway, in today's video, we will not only explore the rest of the story of Box of Goblins but also discuss its ending a little. So, in episode 6, we see Toriguchi talking to the locals, and according to them, the man wearing black clothes and white gloves was the one committing crimes against young girls. Now, in the present timeline, Sekiguchi, Kyogoku-do, and Toriguchi are having a conversation, where Toriguchi shares his findings with Kyogoku from their conversation. We also understand that Kyogoku was extremely smart. He could figure out unspoken truths just by observation. They have a long discussion, but I will only focus on the parts relevant to the main plot so that the story stays on track. So, Kyogoku also knows about Toriguchi's hometown, which is quite strange. However, he proves that he has extensive knowledge about all the shrines in Japan and can even recall complex details. People believed that those who made prophecies had their own way of contacting spirits, which was considered a real phenomenon. However, not everyone in this field was necessarily genuine. Kyogaku also talks about espers, fortune tellers, mediums, and spirits, explaining that each plays a different role in spiritualism. Then, the conversation shifts to how priests make themselves into mediums, elevating their status even higher than gods, leading ordinary people to worship them. But in most cases this is wrong. Toriguchi then talks about a man named Kino, who gave him a notebook containing the names of people who were followers of an upcoming religion, meaning this religion had not been officially established yet. However, if its followers continued to grow, it could eventually become a new religion. The leader of this cult was Unbako-sama, and the notebook contained the names of nearly 300 people. The interesting part is that Kino did not demand a single penny for leaking this secret. Instead, he wanted Toriguchi to write an article about it. The whole story was that while following Unbako-sama, his followers became even more miserable, and in return, Unbako demanded heavy donations from them under the pretense of relieving their suffering. This revealed the unfaithful nature of Unbako-sama. Now, the story shifts to the past, where Toriguchi personally went to meet Unbako-sama, of course disguised as a client, not revealing his true identity. Here we learn something shocking. This Unbako-sama was the same priest whom Yuriko's mother had invited to her house to cleanse the place. This means Yuriko was also connected to this whole situation, which we will learn more about later. Anyway, Unbako-sama becomes suspicious of Toriguchi and scares him away. After that, Toriguchi talks to Unbako-sama's neighbor, and we finally learn about Unbako-sama's backstory. Initially, Unbako-sama was a box maker, just like the other members of his family. His grandmother was highly skilled in spiritualism, but after her death, Unbako-sama took up box making. However, during the war, his box-making industry was shut down, and suddenly, rumors spread that Unbako-sama had become possessed. As a result, he supposedly gained supernatural powers. His wife and son also found him unbearable and left him, leaving Unbako-sama completely alone. One day, Unbako-sama found a box in the attic of his house. Inside the box, his grandmother had placed a vase, and inside that vase, there was a note with the word Muryu, which means goblin. Upon reading this, Unbako-sama completely changed, and from that moment on he started gathering followers. Hearing the word Muryu, Kyogaku became visibly disturbed, as if lost in deep thought. Now, in episode 7, we are introduced to a novel called The Girl in the Box, shown from Sekiguchi's perspective. The story then returns to the present, where Kyogaku reveals why he doesn't like dealing with goblins or Muryu. Kyogaku explains the history and true definition of Muryu to everyone. Basically, Muryu is not a straightforward word. It actually refers to monsters. In ancient times, Muryu were considered water spirits and gods. Later, their concept evolved into spirits living inside water, similar to the Japanese folklore creature kappa. According to the dictionary, Muryu refers to the spirits of trees and stones. The Chinese philosopher Confucius also described the spirits of trees and stones as Muryu, while he referred to water spirits as Masho and earth spirits as Hunya. Locally, Muryu were also known as corpse-eating demons, which is a concept rooted in ancient beliefs. We will cover this in detail in a separate video on ancient entities. It was widely believed that Muryu fed on the bodies inside coffins, and in ancient times, these spirits were exorcised through onmyoto rituals. Now, Kyogaku does not want to deal with Muryu because they are even older than demons, and their true nature is undefined. He further explains that Muryu reside in intricate spaces like the shadows of shadows, making them even more mysterious. Unbako-sama may not know much, but he definitely knows about Muryu. However, Sekiguchi also points out that Unbako-sama's followers are becoming poorer and more miserable day by day, which suggests that Unbako-sama is doing something wrong in his rituals. But Toriguchi argues that this is just a trick used by Unbako-sama to manipulate his followers. He convinces them that their minds and hearts need cleansing, and after that, their unclean wealth is donated to someone. And who is that someone? Obviously, Unbako-sama himself. So, in a way, Unbako-sama is benefiting from this entire process, even though his followers are suffering. Now, Toriguchi asks Kayagaku for help because, as a journalist, he wants to expose Unbako-sama's corruption to the world. Additionally, Toriguchi suspects that Unbako-sama is the one killing girls and placing their body parts inside boxes. This was possible because Unbako-sama was a skilled box maker. Toriguchi then shares the names of the recently missing girls' mothers, whose names also appeared in Kino's register. This meant that the mother of a recent victim was one of Unbako-sama's followers. In that register, some people were also marked as potential victims, and 7 of them were daughters of Unbako-sama's followers. However, Kayagaku warns that they cannot accuse anyone without solid evidence. Therefore, Kayagaku instructs Toriguchi to find out how Unbako-sama performs his exorcisms, as it might reveal some clues. Kayagaku then tells Sekiguchi to study Kino's register and hand it over to the police. When Sekiguchi asks if he should give it to Detective Kiba, Kayagaku refuses. As Sekiguchi starts reading all the followers' names in the register, he suddenly finds the name of his friend Kubo Sonoko, a famous novelist who had written the book The Girl in the Box. Sekiguchi reveals that he had met Sonoko once before but doesn't know much about him. After this, Sekiguchi gets lost in the world of novels again. Meanwhile, Yuriko is now completely alone after Kanako's disappearance. Now, at the beginning of episode 8, we see Sekiguchi imagining the story of The Girl in the Box. Sekiguchi was filling boxes at his home, recalling the time when he had first arrived in this town. It suddenly struck him that on the night he traveled here by train, he had seen the same man carrying a box. But was that real? No, it was just a scene from the Girl in the Box novel that Sekiguchi had imagined. The animation of that event was merely his imagination. In reality, he had never actually seen a man in a black coat carrying a box. Meanwhile, Yuriko is seen returning home from school, and at the same time, Sekiguchi is still lost in thoughts about the Girl in the Box. Sekiguchi, now carrying Kano's register, was possibly on his way to hand it over to the police. On the other hand, Detective Kiba arrives at a healthcare facility, where he discusses the case of the missing girls with a doctor. The doctor, though a bit eccentric, shares some useful information with Kiba. He reveals that Yuzuki Kano is not on the victim list. None of her body parts have been found so far. If these victims were being dismembered, they were probably still alive at the time of the act, which is extremely disturbing. The real purpose of the culprit might be to conduct some kind of experiment. Suddenly, Detective Kiba asks the doctor about Mimasaka Kushiro. The doctor responds saying, yes, he was a genius surgeon, and he was possibly working on immortality. Kiba then learns that Sekiguchi had visited the doctor earlier that morning for an inquiry. In fact, Sekiguchi had handed over Kano's register to the doctor for further study. This led Kiba to suspect that the chief of the black box facility might actually be the real killer, Mimasaka himself. Now, it was revealed that the black box facility, from where Kanako had disappeared, was run by none other than the famous surgeon Mimasaka. Meanwhile, at Kayagaku's house, Sekiguchi, Toriguchi, and Inokuchi had gathered, as they were investigating the case together. Toriguchi shared an important piece of information. Since last summer, Unbako-sama had been receiving orders for large-sized boxes from a particular buyer. Who was this buyer? A man in a black suit who always wore white gloves. Toriguchi then talks about Unbako-sama's wife, who had fallen into depression, leading to a heart condition. Despite her illness, she gave birth to a child, but after that, she locked herself inside a room. One day, when Unbako-sama entered the room, he found an iron box with bloodstains around it. What happened to his wife? Nobody knows. But since that day, Unbako-sama kept that box inside his cottage. Now, Toriguchi had secretly recorded Unbako-sama's cleansing ritual and brought the tape recorder with him. The moment Kayagaku listened to the recording, he immediately realized that Unbako-sama was not performing a proper exorcism. Inokuchi then asked, "What should we do now?" To which Sekiguchi coldly replied, "How should I know? Do whatever you want. You're the detective, aren't you?" As the four men sat around the table, they started to connect the dots and link Yuriko to both cases. Yuriko was a close friend of Kanako, who had been abducted. Yuriko's mother was a follower of Unbako-sama, the same man suspected of harming young girls. And then, another shocking revelation. Kanako's real mother was actually her elder sister, Yoko. It turned out that when Yoko was 17 years old, she had secretly given birth to Kanako. Yes, the person we thought was her elder sister is actually her mother. Just then, Kiba arrives and surprises everyone. He is angry at all of them, but Kyagaku says to Kiba, "Tell us your side of the story and everything will connect." Meanwhile, in the town, Yuriko is reminiscing about Kanako. She sees the man in the black suit and white gloves at a painting shop. The man starts a conversation with her and says, "I'm a painter, and I would like to draw you." After this, Yuriko returns home, where Inakichi and Sekiguchi meet her. Yuriko feels uncomfortable talking to them, so she runs away from home and goes to meet the man in the black suit. The man shows her a picture of Kanako and takes her to a deserted building filled with many boxes. Meanwhile, we see Sekiguchi again imagining himself in a novel. However, this time he sees the man in the black suit, who says, "My process has failed again." He explains that he could not preserve the girls' bodies because their souls were polluted. This was a clear indication that the man in the black suit had probably already harmed Yuriko as well. At school, the girls talk badly about Yuriko, saying she is not a good person, while the police investigate. Yuriko is hated by everyone. Fukumato asks the other girls about the 3 words related to her, but the girls reply that they don't know anything about it. Meanwhile, Detective Kiba meets Yuriko's real mother, Kanako's mother, and they talk. The story then shifts to the past, where Inakichi and Sekiguchi are driving at high speed to meet Yuriko. They first stop at the restaurant where Yuriko had met the man in the black suit. After a while, the man in the black suit is seated at the table behind them. Inakichi gets up from his seat and asks the man, "You know about Kanako, don't you?" Sekiguchi tries to stop him, but to his shock, Sekiguchi knows the man in the black suit. He is none other than the famous writer, Kubo Shunko. Kubo says he doesn't know who Kanako is, but when Inakichi shows him Kanako's picture, Kubo gets scared, and his reaction makes it clear that he knows more than he's letting on. He knew Kanako and even asked for her picture from both of them, claiming that he would use the picture to find the girl. Now, keep in mind that this all happened before Yuriko met him. In the present time, Yuriko says goodbye to them and goes to meet Kubo. However, the 2 detectives break into Yuriko's house. Inside, Yuriko's mother was about to do something wrong to herself. Inakichi quickly opens the closed doors and windows and manages to save Yuriko's mom. From their conversation, we learn that Yuriko's mother had donated everything to Unbako-sama, and all she had left was this house, which she wanted to leave for Yuriko. So, it became clear that Unbako-sama really manipulates his followers to give up everything, be it their house, jewelry, or any possessions, for a spiritual life, while he keeps the money for himself. If a person doesn't have money, they become poor and unhappy because, in today's world, everyone needs at least a little to survive. Yuriko didn't like her mother because she had allowed herself to be manipulated, so she never stopped her mother from taking this wrong step. But Inakichi helps Yuriko's mother realize her mistake. She accepts that she had been wrong to think Yuriko was possessed by a demon, when in reality, Yuriko just needed her mother's love. Now, who introduced Yuriko's family to Unbako-sama? It was Sasagawa, the man who is now Yuriko's mother's current partner. Sekiguchi and Inakichi try to explain to him about the corrupt priest Unbako-sama, but he isn't willing to understand. Eventually, when Inakichi should have kept Yuriko's mother inside because there was a criminal targeting girls outside, she insisted on going out. She called out loudly for Yuriko and told Fukumato to search for her. The story then shifts to Detective Kiba and Yukiko, who are sitting in the house's courtyard. Kiba asks Yukiko how she knows Mimi Saka, to which Yukiko replies, "Mimi Saka was the one who treated my mother. He was our family doctor for a long time, but in the end he couldn't save her." Kiba tells her that he knows she lied about the disappearance of Yuriko in the black suit and white gloves. The truth is, there was no third person involved. For a long time, he himself had been sitting at the back of the black box facility, and he didn't see anyone else. Yoko says, "I did this because the police were suspecting both me and Amimiya, even though we had nothing to do with it. So, to remove suspicion from ourselves, I lied." Detective Kiba still wants to continue his investigation, but Yuko probably doesn't want that. At this point, I know the story is getting a bit complicated, so let me explain things in a shorter, simpler way. Here's what's happened so far. We see Kiba investigating Kanako's disappearance, while Sekiguchi, Kyu, Tori, and Inokaju are uncovering details about the girl's killer. All four of them are suspicious of Unbako-sama, because the daughters of his followers were the ones being targeted, and so far, there were two connections in the case involving Kanako and the girl's body parts. One was the man in the black suit and white gloves, who was Kubo Shunko. But recently, it was revealed that there was no black-suited man around the black box facility, and Yuriko had just recently become a target. In this scenario, the mystery remains. Why is Kubo Shunko doing this, and did he push Kanako onto the train tracks? Yes, you'll get answers to these questions as the story unfolds, so stay tuned till the end of the video. Anyway, now Kyu helps Sekiguchi with his book, and suddenly he asks Sekiguchi if Kubo Shunko wears gloves. Sekiguchi confirms it, and just then a police officer arrives, informing them that Yuriko hasn't returned home. Kyu connects all the dots and concludes that Kubo Shunko is the criminal who is targeting girls in town. Now, Kubo receives a phone call, and we learn that Yuriko's arms were found in a box, proving that Kubo is indeed the killer. At the beginning of episode 10, we see an excerpt from Kubo Shunko's novel, while Sekiguchi imagines saying to Kyu that people who perform exorcisms and misuse this art are no different from demons or spirits themselves. In the next scene, the four of them meet and confront Unbako-sama, and they also need to figure out where Kubo Shunko is, where he's carrying out his crimes. Kyu never involved himself in all these things, but the recent tragedy with Yuriko's death shook him deeply, and now he's determined to uncover the truth. Now in the past, we see the same discussion when Kyu tells them about Yuriko's body, and Sekiguchi still can't believe that Kubo, an introverted writer, could commit such horrific acts. Then, Kyu says that Kubo became famous by writing a novel called The Garden Collector, where a priest collects the pain and suffering of people, storing all the negative emotions in stones in a shrine. But gradually, the priest himself became part of these negative entities or emotions, and his powers diminished. This depicts the life of Unbako-sama. There were more details in this explanation, but I won't focus on all of them. As a whole, Kubo Shunko became famous by writing a novel about the life of Unbako-sama. The box that Unbako-sama's wife left behind, which had bloodstains on it, hides a secret. In present time, the four of them set off to visit Unbako-sama's shrine, where along the way, Kyu tells Sekiguchi that all of Kubo's novels are not just fictional stories but detailed descriptions of his crimes, where he only changed the names of characters and places. Yes, friends, Kubo was a psychopath or a deranged criminal who committed crimes in real life and then wrote them into his novels, making them vivid and realistic. At this point, Sekiguchi understands that the novel The Girl Inside the Box is also based on a real-life incident, where the protagonist kills girls and fills them inside boxes. So now, in the shrine, Kyu explains the correct way to confront Unbako-sama and correct many of his ritualistic practices. Here we learn that Kyu is not an ordinary man. He is an exorcist, one of the greatest in the field, although he doesn't practice it. Unbako-sama points to a box, saying that it is the real box where demons or negative spirits are trapped. However, Kyu says there's nothing inside, and Unbako-sama might not know that Mirio is not in this box, but in this very room, which is a box in itself. Unbako-sama's lady assistant had a stomach ache, and Kyu, without examining her, simply looked at her and told her this. In their conversation they talk about Mirio, demons, and Chinese astrology, which is interesting, but I'll just give you the gist. Basically, it's clear now that Unbako-sama was deceiving his followers, but he did have some knowledge, though it was on a small scale, and he used that to trick people. We also find out that his grandmother was a clairvoyant or a fortune teller, and she had knowledge of exorcism. The real Unbako-sama was the box behind him, which contained the severed fingers of a man. Upon hearing this, the fake Unbako-sama is shocked. And this was the same box that Unbako-sama's wife had left behind. After her disappearance, a man from the court attacks them. This man injures both police officers and escapes. But Q somehow stands up, and upon seeing the inside of the room, is shocked. In a dark room, there were many boxes, and on a table, Kubo was writing his novel. One of the boxes contained Yuriko, who, of course, was not alive. At this point, the police failed to catch Kubo. In present time, Sekiguchi, Q, and Inokizu sit in the study room, discussing the entire incident, and then another shocking revelation occurs. Essentially, Kubo Shunko was the son of Unbako-sama. Yes, friends, Unbako-sama knew about his son's misdeeds and even supported him. In a way, Kubo forced his old father to help him. What happened was that once Unbako-sama's box-making business shut down, his wife and son, Kubo, separated from him. Or rather, Unbako-sama distanced himself from them. That's when, accidentally or intentionally, we don't know, Kubo separated his finger and placed it inside the iron box. Later, Kubo's mother fell ill and passed away. After her death, Kubo went to his dad with the box containing his fingers, asking for them back. In short, Unbako-sama had not cared for him, which made him feel guilty. Unbako-sama became a puppet of Kubo, and in a way, became an accomplice in his wrongdoings. Sekiguchi also asks how Unbako-sama's eyes turned white during exorcisms. Q explains that it was because he had cataracts, which caused a white layer to form over his eyes. Unbako-sama's assistant had stomach pain because she was involved in sinful acts with her boss, and as a result, she developed an ulcer. The idea is that when you engage in wrongdoings, bad things will happen to you too. Q explains that Yuriko's death was inevitable because all the girls were targeted in alphabetical order in a register, and that's why Q had sent Sekiguchi and Inokizu to look for her, but unfortunately they couldn't save her. During this time, Inokizu feels like Q is hiding something, but Q says the case is solved and it should be closed. However, the question remains. Where is Kana? If she was a victim of Kubo, why weren't her body parts found? These are good questions, but the answer soon comes. The body parts of Kubo are found, indicating that the hunter himself has become the prey. So yes, the real killer will be revealed later, and this leads to the beginning of episode 11. There are only 3 episodes left. In the beginning of episode 11, we see Yuko-san writing and thinking about her past. After the death of her father in her childhood, she distanced herself from her mother, who was mentally and physically unwell. Yuko recalls that eventually, an incident occurred that changed her life, and as she was writing, Kiba came to meet her. This all took place on the day Kiba came to meet Yuko. Now, the story shifts to January 26, 1938, when people pretending to be paramedics enter a bank and vaccinate everyone there. Soon after, everyone in the bank falls ill and they die as well. This incident is known as the Teko Bank poisoning incident, where the prime suspect was a pharmaceutical company. Here, a man is interrogated who was quite skilled in using toxic substances. Well, he had conducted experiments during the war and was from Unit 731. In fact, a research facility named Nobi comes into the picture. However, I'm not going into all the details of this because it would be a topic for a late-night show, as I mentioned earlier. Just to summarize, the Teko incident revealed a major connection to the Japanese army, where they were attempting to create secret chemical weapons and were conducting live experiments on POWs. If you want a separate video on these topics, feel free to comment. But for now, let's focus on the anime. So, Sekiguchi and Todoroguchi are shocked to learn that Kubo, the criminal, was somehow involved in this. Inokizu, who can predict future events, asks Q whether Kubo had any connection to Konokeo's case. Basically, the point is that the case of Konokeo's disappearance involving body parts had now diverged, and the entire story would now focus on Konokeo. Todoroguchi asks Yoko who it was that pushed Konokeo onto the train tracks, who made her disappear from the box facility, and who killed assistant Suzuki? These are still valid questions. Everyone forces Q to reveal if he's hiding anything, and Q decides to visit Oki-san at the hospital with the others. On the way, he tells them the whole story. Q says he has known Dr. Mimi Saka from the time of the war, and both were involved in research at the black box facility. Kubo was involved in religious matters where POWs, prisoners of war, were used. They were being converted into Shintoism, and Dr. Mimi Saka was possibly researching immortality. Essentially, they wanted to create soldiers who would never die, and for this, they aimed to replace or transplant real human body parts and organs. However, the army could not carry out this research. One day, Q learned that he was separating from his wife, Mimi Saka Kanoko, who is Yoko's mother. In this case, Yoko's father is Dr. Mimi Saka, and this was something that Detective Kiwa was not informed about. Now, Kiwa, wearing his military uniform and carrying his pistol, heads toward the black box facility. At the hospital, everyone questions Q about the situation, and he reveals that Kubo's hands and feet had been severed, and it seemed like someone had tied him up. Q tells Sekiguchi, Todoroguchi, and Inokizu to go to the black box facility, while he goes elsewhere. Inokizu first goes to Yoko's house, sits her in a car, and then they all head to the facility. Meanwhile, we learn that the property under Kanako's name will be claimed by Yoko, as even if Kanako is alive, she will need money for her treatment. At the black box facility, Kiwa knocks out the guard and confronts Dr. Mimi Saka. Kiwa asks him what he did to Kanako, as he believes Dr. Mimi Saka might have been the one who made all the girls disappear through Kubo in order to continue his research on immortality. However, Dr. Mimi Saka calmly responds that it's not as easy as just experimenting on anyone. Dr. Mimi Saka is not intimidated by the confrontation and tells Kiwa that if he doesn't trust him, he can shoot him. But somewhere, Kiwa begins to believe that Dr. Mimi Saka is not guilty and didn't do anything to Kanako. Just then, Sekiguchi, Todoroguchi, and Inokizu arrive at the black box facility. In the 12th episode, we see Sekiguchi imagining his novel again, where he realizes that the time has come to unveil the truth. The person who will end the story is none other than Q, and this is the story from his novel Vertigo, written by Sekiguchi. In the present time, Kiwa is about to harm Dr. Mimi Saka, but Yoko stops him, saying that Dr. Mimi Saka is her father. This shocks Kiwa, and to calm him down, Inokizu punches Kiwa. They all now wait for Q, who arrives with Masako, Oki, and Fukumoto. Masako recognizes Q, and Q says that he is here to exorcise Mario or the evil. He continues, saying that the human brain is the organ where our consciousness resides, and that it's our consciousness that makes each individual unique. He explains that in this whole story, everyone has their own side, which cannot be understood just by looking from the outside. For example, Yuriko didn't have a good relationship with her mother, just like Kanako didn't have a good relationship with her mother. She didn't even know that Yoko, whom she considered her older sister, was actually her mother. But Yuriko thought that Kanako was an angel who had no problems in her life. One night, when Kanako and Yuriko were at the station, Yuriko noticed tears in Kanako's eyes and saw a pimple-like mark on her neck. Suddenly, something overtook her, which is referred to as torimano in Japanese. I have already explained this in previous parts, but basically, Yuriko-chan was the one who pushed her beloved friend Kanako onto the train tracks. So, Yuriko is responsible for Kanako's accident. She had pushed her, but she had also mentioned a man in a black suit. This man is none other than the hero from Sekiguchi's novel Vertigo, whom Sekiguchi had based on Q. This may sound silly, but for mentally ill patients, distinguishing between reality and hallucinations can be difficult, and that's exactly what happened to Yuriko. We repeatedly see this throughout the story, as Sekiguchi himself is often lost in the stories of his novels, believing them to be real. You might remember that Fukumoto once asked the schoolgirls about 3 words. Te nin goso, which means decay of an angel, den uka tozen, and sekai kaizen. All these words essentially mean that after death, a human becomes an angel, and these words weren't taught in school, but were used by Sekiguchi in his novel Vertigo. This proves that Yuriko had read his novel, and the reference to the man in the black suit also came from there. So, one mystery is solved. Yuriko was the one who pushed Kanako onto the train tracks, either because she wasn't mentally well or was possessed by Torimano. So, Yuriko herself pushed Kanako, but she had mentioned a man in a black suit. This man is none other than the hero from Sekiguchi's novel Vertigo, which Sekiguchi had created by referencing Q. This might sound quite silly, but for mentally ill patients, distinguishing between reality and hallucinations can be difficult, and that's exactly what happened to Yuriko. We see this repeatedly throughout the story, where Sekiguchi himself often gets lost in the stories of his novels and believes them to be real. Kiwa asks, "What's secret?" But before Kyugoku can say anything, Dr. Mimasaka tells him to stay quiet. Then, Kyugoku continues, saying that Shibata, whom everyone believed to be Yoko's biological father and whose property was supposed to go to Kanako, was actually not her real father. We, the audience, already know this, but Masoka-san, the attorney, was unaware. He then says that Yoko had deceived his master for so many years. But Kyugoku explains that this is exactly why Yoko never wanted to accept the property meant for Kanako. Finally, Yoko reveals that Shibata knew about her pregnancy and sympathized with her, which is why he became her father figure or guardian. Later, Yoko gave birth to Kanako. However, since Kanako's treatment required a huge amount of money, she had no choice but to claim the property. In fact, Kanako's treatment was supposed to take place in the black box facility, which needed funds to run smoothly. But Kyugoku argues that even though they brought Kanako here in medical research, there's often a difference between trying to save a patient's life and actually succeeding in doing so, something Yoko did not understand. If they had directly received the money, Kanako's treatment wouldn't have happened. That's why they staged Kanako's kidnapping. Yes, friends, Kanako's disappearance was a staged drama. In fact, the ransom letter was written by Yoko herself, which even fooled Detective Kiwa. They didn't have a solid plan, just a way to get Kanako out of the facility. Now, the real mystery is how they managed to get Kanako out. Before discussing that, let's talk about Amamiya's role. Basically, he didn't do much. He just got caught up in the plan alongside Yoko. In the Kanako disappearance plan, Suzuki played a key role. Yoko, Amamiya, Suzuki, and Dr. Mimasaka collaborated to stage the kidnapping to get the money so that Kanako's inheritance would go to Yoko, allowing her to fund Kanako's treatment. If Kanako had died before Shibata, they wouldn't have received any money. So, they staged Kanako's abduction to prove that she was alive and being held hostage. Suzuki then came up with the idea of keeping Kanako alive for a longer period. While Suzuki's ultimate goal was money, Amamiya and Yoko just wanted to keep Kanako alive. Now, when Kanako was brought to the facility, she was on the verge of death. Taking someone in that condition out of the facility was nearly impossible. But after years of research, Suzuki and Mimasaka came up with an idea. Suddenly, Aizo speculates, maybe they turned Kanako into a human machine and shrunk her to take her out. But Kyugoku dismisses this, saying that such things are only possible in movies, not in real life. Then comes the most intricate truth of this series. As we know, human body organs are intricately designed to perform major functions effortlessly, like kidneys filtering fluids, the heart pumping blood, etc. However, making a machine perform the same tasks requires numerous pieces of equipment since machines aren't as advanced as the human body. So, turning a human into a machine would require a massive amount of space to accommodate all the necessary equipment for maintaining body functions. Kyugoku explains that Mimasaka is a genius. He has arranged so many machines inside this black box facility that they can keep human organs alive. Everyone is in shock when it is revealed that Kanako-chan's brain was likely preserved in one of these boxes through machines. In other words, the entire facility itself was converted into a humanoid system. Yes, friends, Mimasaka then states, I haven't done anything wrong. I only saved a life. You can't put me in jail for that. To this, Kyugoku replies, even if you didn't commit a crime, your most recent patient is a criminal, and Kuin is here to arrest him. Everyone is shocked when they discover that the box that once preserved Kanako's brain now contains Kubo's brain. So, it became clear that Misaka had eliminated Kubo and preserved his brain here to retain his consciousness. After all, a person's identity is defined by their consciousness. I know this has become quite complicated, but this is an anime, and things always tend to get complex in anime. I hope you are keeping up with everything so far. Now let's move forward to the series finale, the 13th episode. At the beginning of the episode, Kyugoku states that after dedicating his entire life to research, Misaka had transformed this facility into a human body system, where only the brain was preserved while the rest of the body functioned entirely through machines. And the most shocking part, Kubo could actually hear and comprehend everything that was being said. This meant that Misaka had truly succeeded in his research. At this moment, Sekiguchi completely loses control. At this moment, Sekiguchi asks how all of this is even possible. That's when Ino Kuju says that Kubo once saw Kanako inside a box, which inspired him to write his novel, The Girl in the Box. Now, if you remember the very first scene of the series, when Sekiguchi saw a man carrying a box on a train, that man was actually Kubo. Inside that box, Miya was carrying Kanako's head right in front of him. In real life, Kanako had already died on August 31st. This meant that only her brain was preserved. Yugo now explains that Miya wasn't as foolish as he seemed. Everyone assumed he was Yoko-san's lover, but in reality, he had watched Kanako grow up and deeply loved her. Actually, Yugo's family relationships were quite messed up, and Miya was also a part of it. Now, here's what happened. On the day the doctor and his assistant planned to separate Kanako-chan's body parts and preserve only her head and brain, Miya had no idea what the procedure entailed. He had always dreamed that when Kanako recovered, the three of them, Yoko, Kanako and himself, would go to the lake where Kanako always wanted to go. Miya was a kind-hearted man who wanted a peaceful life with Yoko and Kanako, whom he deeply loved. This was also why he never married Yoko. However, when Miya learned that Misaka's treatment would leave Kanako unable to walk, run, or even remain human, just a consciousness trapped inside a massive box or machine, he was devastated. This is why he turned against Suzuki and his plan. But by then, Suzuki had already carried out the operation and severed Kanako's hand. Now comes the miracle. One of Kanako's arms remained alive due to Suzuki's research. In the end, Suzuki-san promised that he would hand over this living arm to Miya. On the night of August 31st, Kanako's body parts, her right arm and legs, were buried in the water. When the police found the first body parts in September, they were actually Kanako's. The reason the police even found her right hand was that the truck carrying her body parts had an unlocked compartment. Why was it unlocked? Because of the accident caused by Fukumoto on the day he arrived at the facility, as mentioned in episode 2. After this accident, the tension between Miya and Suzuki grew even worse. Now, you probably already know that the left arm, which was still alive, was in Suzuki-san's facility, and Miya wanted it. Why? Because he saw it as Kanako's last remaining memory. During their confrontation, Miya attacked Suzuki with the box containing the arm and managed to escape from the facility, taking Kanako-san's consciousness box with him. This was the same box where her consciousness had been preserved. Now, finally, Miya had Kanako's consciousness, and he was taking her to the lake, the place Kanako had always wanted to visit. During this time, Kubo saw Miya carrying Kanako's consciousness box, which terrified him. That's why Kubo was so scared when he later saw Kanako's picture. Even though he didn't know her name or any details, he still recognized her face. Now, this is definitely weird, but Miya was actually happy. He wanted to spend the rest of his life with Kanako, even in this bizarre form. Because of this mystery, Kubo became obsessed and started killing girls one after another, desperate to uncover the truth. How could a human head survive without a body? This means that in the end, both Miya and Kubo were mentally ill. However, both had very different kinds of illnesses, we can say. Now, everyone goes crazy over this theory because it was too much to process. But medically, it was Mima Saka who made this possible. Kubo's real obsession was how to separate a person's body parts without actually killing them so that their brain or head could remain alive. And that's why he targeted young girls, but he was failing. After repeating the same process with Yugo, he took all his saved money and came to this black box facility to learn the art from Mima Saka himself. And what did Mima Saka do? He repeated the process on Kubo himself. Now, you might be wondering how Kubo even found out about Mima Saka's facility. He must have learned about it from Yuriko because she had come to town to meet her friend. While wandering around, Kubo must have found out about Yuriko and Kanako's friendship. Moreover, Yuriko and Kanako looked the same, so that might have made him target Yuriko as well. And now, in the present time, Kubo's head or consciousness is perfectly functioning inside one of the facility's boxes. Kyog now tells Dr. Mima Saka that because of his unnatural experiments, so many people lost their lives, and he put darkness or the devil into everyone's hearts. But he asks him, "Did you have a problem with your wife Kinoka's physical illness, which made her look older and uglier day by day? Do you disregard the body for this reason?" And now the final moment has come to end his story. You started researching immortality to save your wife, but the truth is that you slowly began to hate her ugly face. In fact, even while supporting her, you were divorcing her. So guys, let me tell you that Yoko-san was Dr. Mima Saka's wife Kinoka's daughter, and Kanako was Yoko's daughter. Mia was an outsider who simply lived with Yoko and Kanako as their guardian and lover. Shibata, who was Yoko's so-called guardian, only maintained ties with Yoko out of sympathy. And this whole case was about inheriting Shibata's property, which would have gone to Kanako after their deaths. Now, amid all these accusations, Dr. Mima Saka is beaten up because he was the main culprit. And just when Kyog is about to finish him off, Yoko screams that Kanako is her and Mima Saka's daughter. Yes, friends, we finally got the answer to who Kanako's father was. Yoko had a relationship with Dr. Mima Saka, and Kanako was born from it. What happened was that Yoko's mother gradually started falling sick, and Mima Saka was doing everything he could to treat her. But still, she kept growing sicker and uglier day by day. Yoko had an obsession with beauty and deeply sympathized with her father, watching him serve her mother day and night without getting anything in return. So, she seduced Mima Saka and had a physical relationship with him, which led to Kanako's birth. And Suzuki-san knew everything about it. So yes, this was Yoko's big secret. I know this series has been revealing one secret after another, and by now, your mind must be completely blown. Kyog didn't want to reveal this truth to everyone out of respect for Yoko, but eventually the truth came out. In the middle of all this, Inokizu leaves the room. Mima Saka then says that Kyog always talks about the darkness in everyone's life, but his own darkness was caused by Kubo. A debate about brains and impulses follows between them, where Kyog once again displays his excellence. Meanwhile, Sekiguchi, now completely insane, goes to open Kubo's head, but Dr. Mima Saka pushes him away. Then he and Yoko take Kubo's head box and start escaping. As they ascend in the lift, Kiba tries to stop Yoko, but she injures him with a scalpel. However, Kiba isn't seriously hurt. Meanwhile, the entire facility loses power because Inokizu has entered the control room and tampered with the controls, causing all the machinery and life support systems to fail. Kubo himself was unhappy about becoming a victim of this unnatural experiment. He tells scientist Mima Saka that, "I am no longer a human being. You have turned me into a Morio or demon who lives inside a box. A human is only human as long as they have a body." Kubo realizes that just having consciousness isn't enough to define humanity. One isn't human if only their consciousness survives. As soon as everyone arrives, they see that Kubo's head has attacked Mima Saka, which leads Yoko to strike Kubo. In the end, both Mima Saka and Kubo are killed. Yoko acknowledges her madness, and Detective Kiba handcuffs her. Looking at it, Yoko was the one who killed Kubo. But by staying involved in her father's obsession, she was also responsible for many deaths. And after this night, All the inner demons or Moria inside everyone had come to an end. Now many months later all these people sit together and talk. Fukumoto, who was once a policeman, has now become a salesman. Just then, a man named Sama arrives and tells them about a box. Upon hearing this, Sekiguchi gets startled, wondering what new trouble has arrived now. But to everyone's relief, the box contained nothing but some wilted flowers. Sekiguchi asks Kyog if he thinks Amiya is happy now. To this, Kyog replies, maybe because to be happy, a person just needs to forget that they are human. And with a glimpse of Sekiguchi's recent novel, this story comes to an end. So, friends, this was the complete explanation of Box of Goblins. I have revealed all the secrets and explained all the twists thoroughly. Although the series itself doesn't follow a linear narrative, I have tried my best to explain it in a linear way so that everything is clear to you. I hope everything makes sense to you now. But if anything is still unclear, the comment section is open. Feel free to ask your questions and I will try my best to answer them. Now, Box of Goblins also touched on many historical events in Japan, and several dark topics were introduced that we didn't cover in this video. But as I promised, I will make separate videos on those. I just need to know if you guys are interested in them or not. If you are, let me know in the comments so that I can plan those videos, which, of course, will be released in 2025. Overall, I really like this series. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. And if you like this video, then please like and share it. And if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe because we keep bringing such videos.